baby cries endlessly under the scorching Texas sun. His warrior father is dying, and a broken widow, lost in her own grief, hears the sound that pulls her back to life. But what happens when their worlds collide in the tall grass will leave you breathless. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The September sun beat down mercilessly upon the Texas plains, turning the endless grassland into waves of gold and amber that stretched toward a horizon blurred by heat. Catherine Wells sat motionless on the porch of her small homestead, her pale hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The black morning dress she wore seemed to absorb every ray of sunlight, making the heat almost unbearable, but she did not move to seek shade. It had been 8 months since the fever took her husband Thomas and their 3-year-old daughter Emma, within days of each other, leaving Catherine alone in a world that had lost all color and meaning. The homestead sat isolated, 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by tall grass that whispered secrets in the wind. Thomas had chosen this location for its proximity to the creek and the fertile soil, dreaming of the farm they would build together, the children they would raise, the life they would share. Now those dreams lay buried beside him in the small cemetery plot behind the barn, marked by 2 simple wooden crosses that Catherine visited every morning and every evening without fail. She was 26 years old, though her face had aged in these months of grief. Her auburn hair, once her pride, hung in a simple braid down her back, and her green eyes, which Thomas had said reminded him of spring meadows, now held only emptiness. The neighbors from the settlement had stopped visiting after the first few months, uncomfortable with her silence and her sorrow. They whispered that she had lost her mind along with her family, that she was wasting away in that lonely house, that she should sell the land and return to her family in Virginia. But Catherine had nowhere to go, and no desire to leave the only place where she still felt connected to those she had lost. The afternoon was fading into evening when Catherine heard it, a sound so unexpected that at first she thought she had imagined it. The crying of an infant, sharp and desperate, carried on the wind from somewhere beyond her property line. She stood slowly, her heart beginning to beat faster for the first time in months. The crying continued, growing more frantic, more terrified. Catherine descended the porch steps and walked toward the sound, her morning dress dragging through the tall grass. As she approached the tree line near the creek, she saw him. A Comanche warrior sat slumped against a cottonwood tree, his bronze chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Blood stained his buckskin leggings, and an arrow protruded from his left shoulder. In his arms, wrapped in a deerskin blanket, was an infant, perhaps 4 months old, whose face was red from crying. The warrior's dark eyes, glazed with pain and fever, fixed on Catherine as she approached. His right hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt, but the movement was weak and his hand fell away. Catherine stopped a few feet from them, her instincts as a mother overriding her fear. The baby's cries tore at something deep inside her, awakening feelings she had thought died with Emma. "I will not hurt you," she said softly, though she did not know if he understood English. "Please, let me help the child." The warrior's name was Noconi, though Catherine would not learn this until later. He was 28 years old, a respected hunter and warrior of the Penteca Comanche, and the infant in his arms was his son, born to his wife Ayanna just 4 months earlier. 3 days ago, his band had been attacked at dawn by a rival tribe seeking to claim their hunting grounds. Ayanna had been killed in the first moments of the attack, struck down while trying to protect their son. Noconi had fought desperately, killing 3 warriors before an arrow found his shoulder. He had fled with his son, riding for 2 days and nights, the baby crying endlessly for his mother's milk, for comfort Noconi could not provide. The warrior tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. "Tua, water." His son's crying had become weaker, more pitiful, a sound that spoke of hunger and exhaustion and despair. Catherine knelt slowly in the grass, making herself smaller, less threatening. "I have water at my house," she said gently. "I have food. I can help your baby." She extended her hands slowly, palms up, showing she held no weapon. "Please, let me take him. He needs help now." Noconi's vision blurred as fever and blood loss took their toll. He had been searching for a Comanche camp, hoping to find someone who could care for his son, but he had become disoriented, and his horse had collapsed that morning, dead from exhaustion. He knew he was dying. The wound in his shoulder had become infected, and poison was spreading through his blood. But his son must live. This pale woman with the sad eyes, she was his last hope. With trembling hands, Nokoni held out the infant. The baby was crying so hard that his small body shook with each breath. Catherine took him carefully, cradling him against her chest, and the moment her hand touched his fevered brow, something miraculous happened. The infant's crying stopped. He looked up at Catherine with dark eyes so like his father's, and a small sound escaped him, not quite a coo, but no longer a cry of distress. His tiny fingers grasped at the fabric of her dress. Catherine felt something break open inside her chest, a dam that had held back 8 months of frozen grief. Tears, the first she had shed since the day she buried her daughter, began to flow down her cheeks. "Shh, little one," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Shh, I have you now. You are safe." Nokoni watched this through dimming eyes and felt a peace settle over him. The spirits had guided him to this woman. She would care for his son. He tried to speak, to tell her his son's name, Nakai, which meant the one who wanders, but darkness was closing in around him. "Stay awake," Catherine commanded, her voice suddenly strong. "You must stay awake. I cannot carry you both, but I can help you walk. Your son needs you, do you understand? He needs his father." She shifted the baby to one arm and extended her hand to Nokoni. "Take my hand. We will go to my house together." The warrior looked at her hand, pale against the darkening sky, and summoned what remained of his strength. His large hand closed around hers, and with Catherine's help, he struggled to his feet. The world spun around him, but the woman's grip was surprisingly firm. The baby in her arms had settled against her chest, his crying replaced by small, whimpering sounds. Together, they made their slow way across the grassland. Catherine supported as much of Nokoni's weight as she could, her arm around his waist, his arm draped across her shoulders. The warrior was tall and powerfully built, his body honed by a lifetime of riding and hunting, and it took all of Catherine's determination to keep him upright. The baby, perhaps sensing the urgency, remained quiet, his small hand clutching the fabric of Catherine's dress. "My house is just ahead," Catherine said, her voice steady despite her labored breathing. "You can see the roof beyond that rise, just a little farther. Stay with me. Your son needs you to stay with me." Nokoni's head hung low, his long black hair falling around his face. He could smell the woman's scent, soap and lavender, so different from the smells of his own people. His son, nestled against her, had stopped crying. This white woman, this stranger, had brought peace to his child when he could not. Shame and gratitude warred within him, but gratitude won. She was saving his son's life. They reached the house just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Catherine helped Nokoni up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior of the house was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a wooden table and chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. A door led to a small bedroom, and another to a pantry. Catherine guided Nokoni to the bedroom, where a simple bed stood against the wall. "Lie down," she instructed, and Nokoni collapsed onto the mattress, his strength finally exhausted. Catherine laid the baby beside him, and immediately the infant's small hand reached out and grasped his father's finger. Nokoni's eyes opened, focusing on his son's face, and something like a smile touched his lips. Catherine moved quickly, lighting lamps against the gathering darkness. She retrieved water from the well outside, put a pot on the fire to boil, and gathered clean cloth for bandages. She had nursed Thomas through many injuries during their years together, and she knew what needed to be done. The arrow would have to come out, the wound cleaned and bound, but first the baby needed to be fed. In the pantry, she found a clean cloth and soaked it in warm water mixed with a little honey. She returned to the bedroom and lifted the infant into her arms. "I do not have milk for you, little one," she whispered, "but this will give you some nourishment until we can find a wet nurse." She placed the cloth against the baby's lips, and after a moment, he began to suck, drawing the sweet water into his mouth. His eyes closed and his small body relaxed against her. Nokoni watched from the bed, his breathing shallow. The white woman moved with efficiency and grace, tending to his son with the gentle hands of a mother. Who was she? Why was she alone in this house? Where was her man? These questions floated through his fevered mind, but he could not find the strength to voice them. When the baby had taken enough of the sweetened water and fallen into an exhausted sleep, Catherine laid him gently in the wooden cradle that had once held her daughter Emma. The sight of the cradle, empty for so long, brought fresh tears to her eyes, but she pushed the grief aside. There was work to be done. She returned to the bedroom where Nokoni lay, his eyes half closed, his breathing labored and uneven. "I must remove the arrow," Catherine said quietly, kneeling beside the bed. "It will hurt, but the infection will kill you if I leave it. Do you understand?" She touched his uninjured shoulder gently, and his eyes focused on her face. Nokoni nodded once. He had known this moment would come. He had broken off the arrow's shaft days ago, but the head remained buried deep in his flesh, sending poison through his body. "Do it," he whispered in English, the words heavily accented but clear. Catherine was surprised he spoke her language, but she did not comment. She retrieved her husband's hunting knife, held the blade in the fire until it glowed red, then brought it along with the boiled water, clean cloths, and a leather strap to the bedside. "Bite down on this," she said, offering him the strap. "Try not to move." The warrior took the leather between his teeth, his jaw clenching. Catherine cut away the buckskin around the wound, exposing the inflamed flesh. The arrowhead was buried deep, and she could see the dark lines of infection spreading from the wound site. She said a silent prayer, then began to work. Her hands were steady as she used the knife to carefully open the wound wider, allowing access to the arrowhead. Nokoni's body went rigid, every muscle tensed against the pain, but he made no sound beyond a muffled groan. Sweat poured down his face, and his hands gripped the bed frame with such force that the wood creaked. Catherine worked quickly, her fingers probing the wound until she felt the sharp edge of the arrowhead. With careful precision, she extracted it, a wicked piece of flint still attached to a portion of the wooden shaft. Blood flowed freely from the wound, and Catherine immediately pressed clean cloths against it, applying pressure. "The worst is over," she said softly. "The worst is over." She cleaned the wound thoroughly with the boiled water, then packed it with cloth soaked in whiskey from Thomas's last bottle. Nokoni's body shuddered at the burning sensation, but still he made no cry. Finally, Catherine bound the wound tightly with clean bandages, wrapping them around his shoulder and chest. "You must rest now," she said, her voice gentle. "The fever will get worse before it gets better, but I will watch over you." She removed the leather strap from his mouth and offered him water, which he drank gratefully. "My son," Nokoni whispered, his voice barely audible. "His name, Nakai." "Nakai," Catherine repeated softly, the unfamiliar syllables feeling strange on her tongue. "It is a beautiful name. What does it mean?" "The one who wanders," Nokoni said, his eyes closing. "His mother, she died. Ayana. She was—" His voice trailed off as unconsciousness claimed him. Catherine sat beside the bed for a long moment, looking at this stranger who had stumbled into her life. A Comanche warrior, a man her neighbors would call savage, an enemy of her people. Yet he was also a father who had ridden himself nearly to death trying to save his son, who had entrusted that son to her. A stranger. She thought of Thomas, of how he would have ridden through hell itself to save Emma, and she felt a kinship with this wounded man that transcended the boundaries of race and language. Throughout that long night, Catherine moved between the bedroom where Nokoni lay burning with fever and the cradle where baby Nakai slept fitfully. She bathed the warrior's face and chest with cool water, trying to bring down his fever. She changed the baby's wrappings, fashioning diapers from old linens. She fed Nakai more sweetened water, holding him close and humming the lullabies she had once sung to Emma. As dawn broke over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of pink and lavender, Nokoni's fever finally broke. He opened his eyes to find the pale woman asleep in the rocking chair beside his bed, his son cradled in her arms. Both woman and child looked peaceful, and for a moment, Nokoni allowed himself to simply observe them. The woman's face was beautiful, even in its sadness, with delicate features and pale skin that seemed to glow in the early morning light. She had saved his life and cared for his son through the night, asking nothing in return. The slight movement of Nokoni shifting in the bed caused Catherine to wake. Her eyes opened, and for a moment she looked disoriented, as if unsure where she was. Then her gaze fell on Nokoni, and she saw the clarity in his eyes, the absence of fever's glaze. "Your fever has broken," she said softly, careful not to wake the baby. "How do you feel?" "Weak," Nokoni admitted, his voice rough but stronger than before. "But I will live. You saved me. You saved my son." He paused, struggling to find the words in English. "I owe you my life. I owe you his life. This debt I cannot repay." Catherine shook her head slowly. "You owe me nothing. I did what any person with a heart would do." She looked down at the sleeping infant in her arms. "He is beautiful. He has your eyes. He has his mother's spirit," Nokoni said quietly. "Ayana was fierce and gentle like the first rain of spring. She would have wanted him to live, no matter what." He tried to sit up but fell back with a grimace of pain. "Do not move yet," Catherine instructed. "Your wound is deep and you have lost much blood. You must rest for several days before you can travel." She stood carefully and brought Nakai to his father, laying the baby on the bed beside him. Immediately, Nakai's small hand reached out and grasped Nokoni's finger, and the warrior's stern face softened with love. "I cannot stay here many days," Nokoni said, his voice troubled. "Your people, if they find a Comanche in your house, they will kill me. They will kill you for helping me. I have brought danger to your door." Catherine had already considered this. She knew the hatred that existed between the settlers and the Comanche, the brutal cycle of raids and reprisals that had claimed lives on both sides. But looking at this father and son, she could not bring herself to care about the danger. "Then we must make sure no one finds you here," she said simply. "My nearest neighbors are 3 miles away. No one visits me anymore. You will be safe here while you heal." Over the following days, an unexpected routine developed in the small homestead. Catherine tended to Nokoni's wound, changing the bandages twice daily, and watching carefully for signs of renewed infection. She prepared meals of cornbread, beans, and salted pork, foods that were foreign to Nokoni but which he ate gratefully. She cared for baby Nakai with a devotion that surprised even herself, feeding him, cleaning him, singing to him in the quiet hours of the night. Nokoni, despite his weakness, insisted on doing what he could to help. On the 3rd day, he managed to stand and walk a few steps. By the 5th day, he was moving around the house, performing small tasks. He repaired the broken hinge on the pantry door, replaced several loose boards on the porch, and checked the integrity of the barn roof. His people did not live in wooden houses, but he understood construction and took pride in making these repairs as a way of repaying Catherine's kindness. As they worked side by side, they began to talk. Nokoni spoke of his life among the Comanche, of the vast buffalo herds that had once darkened the plains, of the freedom of riding across land that stretched endlessly in all directions. He spoke of Ayana, of how they had married when both were barely more than children, of the joy they had felt when Nakai was born. His voice grew heavy with sorrow when he described the attack that had taken her life, the desperate flight that had brought him to Catherine's door. Catherine, in turn, spoke of Thomas and Emma, of the dreams they had shared, and the cruel swiftness with which disease had stolen them away. She spoke of the emptiness that had consumed her these past months, of how she had simply existed rather than lived, waiting for each day to end so she could be one day closer to joining her family in death. "But then I heard Nakai crying," she said softly, "and something inside me woke up. I realized I still had a reason to wake each morning." They were sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the plains. Nakai slept in Catherine's arms, his small face peaceful in sleep. Nokoni sat beside her, his wounded shoulder still stiff, but healing well. "You have given my son life twice," he said quietly. "Once when you took him from me, and again every day you care for him. Among my people, such a debt creates a bond that cannot be broken." Catherine looked at him, at the strong lines of his face, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the gentleness with which he touched his son. She felt something stirring in her heart that she had thought died with Thomas, a warmth, a connection, a sense of belonging. "I do not think of it as a debt," she said carefully. Caring for Nakai has given me a purpose I thought I had lost forever. If anything, I should thank you for bringing him to me." Nokoni met her gaze, and in that moment something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. They were two souls who had been broken by loss, who had found in each other an unexpected healing. "Catherine," he said, her name sounding beautiful in his accented English, "what will you do when I am well enough to leave? Will you stay here alone again?" The question hung in the air between them. Catherine had been trying not to think about the day when Nokoni would be strong enough to travel, when he would take Nakai and return to his people, leaving her alone once more. The thought filled her with a dread she could not name. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I will go back to what I was before. Waiting. Existing. That is not life," Nokoni said firmly. "You saved my son because you have a mother's heart. You tended my wounds because you have a healer's hands. You cannot let these gifts die in this empty house." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Among my people, when a woman loses her husband and children, and a man loses his wife, it is not shameful for them to build a new family together. The spirits brought us together for a reason." Catherine's heart began to beat faster. Was he suggesting what she thought he was suggesting? "Nokoni, I am a white woman. You are Comanche. Our peoples are at war. How could we possibly—" "My band is scattered," Nokoni interrupted gently. "The attack destroyed our camp. The survivors have fled to join other bands. I could search for them, yes. But what life would Nakai have? Growing up in a world that grows smaller every year, where the buffalo disappear and the white man's fences divide the land, or—" He looked at her intently. "Or I could stay here with you, and we could raise my son together. We could be a family." Catherine's breath caught in her throat at Nokoni's words. Family. The word echoed through her mind, bringing with it a cascade of emotions she had thought herself incapable of feeling again. Hope, fear, longing, uncertainty, all swirled together in her chest until she felt she might break apart from the intensity of it. She looked down at baby Nakai, sleeping peacefully in her arms, his tiny fingers curled around a fold of her dress. In just 1 week, this child had become precious to her in ways she could not fully explain. "The neighbors would never accept it," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They would call me a traitor. They would say I had lost my mind. They might even try to take Nakai away or harm you." The thought of anyone hurting this man or this child filled her with a fierce protectiveness that surprised her with its strength. Nokoni nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Then we do not tell them who I am. My English is good because my mother was a captive from Mexico who taught me her language, and I learned yours from traders. My skin is dark, yes, but there are Mexicans and Spanish who settle in Texas. I could be a ranch hand you hired to help with the farm, a widower with a young son. We would have to be careful, but it could work. You would give up your life, your people, your entire world for this?" Catherine asked, searching his face. "Nokoni, you barely know me. How can you be certain this is what you want?" The warrior was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as he looked out over the darkening plains. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a weight that came from deep within his soul. "When Ayana died, I wanted to die with her. The only thing that kept me breathing was Nakai. I rode for days, watching my son cry with hunger and fear, unable to comfort him, unable to give him what he needed. I failed him as a father." His voice cracked slightly and he paused to compose himself. "Then the spirits led me to you. I watched you touch his brow, and his crying stopped. I watched you care for him through the night, singing to him, holding him as his own mother would have done. And I knew the spirits had sent me to you not just so my son would survive, but so he would have the mother he needs." He turned to look at Catherine directly, his dark eyes intense with emotion. "But it is more than that. These days we have spent together, talking, working side by side, sharing our sorrows and our hopes. I have felt something I did not expect to feel again. I have felt peace. I have felt that perhaps the spirits have not abandoned me, that perhaps there is still a path forward. When I look at you, Catherine, I see strength and kindness and a beauty that comes from within. I see a woman who has known great loss but who still has love to give. And yes, I barely know you, but sometimes the heart knows things the mind cannot explain. Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she listened to his words. Everything he was saying resonated with the feelings that had been growing in her own heart, feelings she had been afraid to name or acknowledge. I feel it too, she admitted, her voice trembling. When you arrived, I was simply existing, waiting to die. But caring for Nakai, talking with you, watching you heal and grow stronger, I have felt myself coming back to life. I have felt that perhaps I could be happy again, that perhaps I could love again. She looked up at him, her green eyes shining with tears. But no Coney, I am afraid. I am afraid of what this means, of the difficulties we will face, of losing you and Nakai the way I lost Thomas and Emma. Nokoni reached out slowly and took her hand in his large, calloused palm warm against her smaller, softer one. I cannot promise that life will be easy, he said quietly. I cannot promise that we will not face hardship and danger, but I can promise that I will protect you and Nakai with my life. I can promise that I will work hard to build a good life here, and I can promise that I will honor the gift you have given me by caring for my son and opening your heart to us. Catherine felt the warmth of his hand, the strength and gentleness in his touch, and she made her decision. Then yes, she said, her voice growing stronger. Yes, we will do this. We will be a family. You and Nakai will stay here, and we will build a life together. I do not know how it will work, but we will find a way. The relief and joy that flooded Nokoni's face transformed him. For the first time since Catherine had met him, he smiled fully, a smile that reached his eyes and lit up his entire countenance. You have made me very happy, Catherine Wells, he said softly. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this gift. That night they sat together on the porch long after the sun had set, talking about the practical matters of their new life together. They decided that Nokoni would take the name Nathan Walker, a simple name that would not draw suspicion. He would tell any neighbors who inquired that he was of mixed Spanish and Mexican heritage, a widower who had been traveling through Texas looking for work when his wife died of fever, leaving him with an infant son. Catherine had hired him to help manage her farm in exchange for room and board. It was a plausible story, one that would explain his presence without raising too many questions. Over the following weeks, their plan took shape. Nathan, as he now called himself, worked tirelessly to improve the farm. He repaired the barn, mended fences, plowed new fields for spring planting. His knowledge of the land, learned through a lifetime of living in harmony with nature, proved invaluable. He showed Catherine which wild plants were edible, how to track game, where to find water during dry seasons. The farm began to thrive in ways it never had under Thomas's management. Catherine, in turn, taught Nathan the ways of settler life. She helped him refine his English, eliminating the accent that might mark him as different. She taught him how to use the farming tools properly, how to interact with the occasional travelers who passed by, how to behave in a way that would not draw unwanted attention. Together, they created a convincing facade that allowed them to live in relative peace. But more importantly, they were building something real beneath that facade. They were building a family. Catherine had fully taken on the role of Nakai's mother, and the bond between them grew stronger each day. The baby thrived under her care, growing chubby and healthy, his dark eyes always seeking her face, his small hands reaching for her. Catherine sang to him, played with him, told him stories, and loved him with all the maternal love that had been trapped inside her since Emma's death. Nathan and Catherine's relationship also deepened. They spent their evenings talking by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, their cultures, their beliefs. Nathan told her about the Comanche way of life, about their respect for the earth and all living things, about their belief that all things were connected in a great sacred circle. Catherine shared her own faith, her belief in a loving God who watched over his children, her hope that Thomas and Emma were at peace in heaven. They found that despite their different backgrounds, their values aligned more than either had expected. Slowly, carefully, they began to fall in love. It started with small gestures, Nathan bringing Catherine wildflowers he found while checking the fence line, Catherine preparing Nathan's favorite foods, their hands brushing as they worked side by side, the way their eyes met across the room and held for a moment longer than necessary. The attraction between them grew, but both were cautious, mindful of the wounds they carried, wanting to build their relationship on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect before taking it further. 3 months after Nathan and Nakai had stumbled into her life, Catherine was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart seized with fear. They had been so careful, so isolated, but now someone was coming. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. 3 riders were approaching the house, and with a sinking feeling, she recognized them. Jacob Turner and his 2 sons, neighbors from the settlement 5 miles east. Nathan emerged from the barn, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. He had seen the riders too. Catherine stepped out onto the porch, forcing a smile. "Mr. Turner, this is a surprise. What brings you out this way?" Jacob Turner was a large man in his 50s, with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. He and his sons dismounted, and Jacob's gaze swept over the property, taking in the repaired barn, the mended fences, the generally improved condition of the homestead. His eyes lingered on Nathan, who stood near the barn door, watching quietly. "Mrs. Wells, we heard rumors that you had taken on a hired hand. Wanted to come see for ourselves that everything was all right." "Everything is fine, as you can see," Catherine said, keeping her voice steady. "This is Nathan Walker. He came through several months ago looking for work, and I hired him to help with the farm. It has been a great help having an extra pair of hands." She gestured toward Nathan. "Nathan, come meet our neighbors." Nathan walked over slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. He had cut his hair shorter in the settler style and wore clothes that Catherine had altered from Thomas's old things. He extended his hand to Jacob. "Pleased to meet you, sir." Jacob shook his hand, his grip firm and testing. "Walker, you say? Where are you from originally?" His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. "Mexico originally, sir," Nathan replied smoothly, his English nearly accent-free. "My mother was Spanish, my father Mexican. I have been traveling through Texas, working different ranches and farms. When I came through here and saw Mrs. Wells trying to manage this place alone, I offered my services." He glanced back toward the house. "I have a young son, and Mrs. Wells has been kind enough to help care for him while I work." "A son?" Jacob's eyebrows rose. "Where is the boy's mother?" "She died of fever several months back," Nathan said, a trace of genuine sorrow entering his voice. "It has been difficult, managing alone. Mrs. Wells has been very generous." The story flowed naturally because it was built on truth, and the emotion behind Nathan's words was real. Jacob studied Nathan for a long moment, then seemed to relax slightly. "Well, it is good that Mrs. Wells has help. This is hard country for a woman alone." He turned back to Catherine. "The settlement is having a harvest celebration in 2 weeks. We hope you will come, Mrs. Wells. You have isolated yourself for too long. It is not healthy." Catherine felt Nathan's presence beside her, steady and reassuring. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Turner. I will consider it." After the Turners left, Catherine and Nathan stood together on the porch, watching until the riders disappeared over the horizon. "That was close," Catherine said quietly. "Do you think he believed us?" "For now," Nathan replied, "but we must be careful. He will be watching." He turned to her, his face serious. "Catherine, perhaps I should leave. I do not want to bring trouble to you." "No," Catherine said firmly, taking his hand. "We are in this together. We will be careful, and we will make it work." She squeezed his hand. "I am not losing you and Nakai. I cannot go back to being alone." That evening, after Nakai had been put to bed, Nathan and Catherine sat together by the fire. The close call with the Turners had shaken them both, making them acutely aware of how fragile their situation was. Nathan broke the long silence. "Catherine, I think we should marry." Catherine's head turned sharply toward him. "What? If we are married, your reputation is protected. A widow remarrying is acceptable, expected even. As your husband, I have a legal right to be here, to work this land. It makes our story stronger, more believable." He paused, then added softly, "And I would be honored to be your husband, not just in name but in truth. These months together have shown me that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. I love you, Catherine. I love your strength, your kindness, Your courage. I love the way you care for Nakai as if he were your own. I love the way you make me laugh, the way you challenge me, the way you see me as a man rather than as Comanche or settler, just as a man. Will you marry me? Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes once more, but these were tears of joy. She had not thought she would ever hear those words again, that any man would want her as his wife. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Nathan, I will marry you. I love you too. I love your gentleness with Nakai, your dedication to making a good life for us, your patience with me as I learn to live again. You have given me back my life. They were married quietly 3 days later by the traveling preacher who passed through the territory monthly. Father Samuel was an elderly man who asked few questions and was simply pleased to see a widow finding happiness again. Nathan presented himself as Nathan Walker, widower, and no one questioned the union. Catherine wore a simple blue dress rather than white, appropriate for a widow's second marriage, and she carried wildflowers that Nathan had picked that morning. As Father Samuel pronounced them husband and wife, Catherine looked into Nathan's eyes and saw her future there. They would face challenges, certainly. There would be difficult times ahead, but they would face them together, as a family. When Nathan kissed her gently, sealing their vows, Catherine felt a completeness she had thought lost forever. The harvest celebration came, and Catherine and Nathan attended together, presenting themselves as a newly married couple. There were whispers, certainly, and suspicious looks from some of the settlers, but Jacob Turner publicly welcomed Nathan to the community, and his endorsement carried weight. Nathan was careful, friendly, but not overly familiar, hard-working, respectful. Gradually, the community accepted him as one of their own. As autumn turned to winter and winter gave way to spring, life on the Wells homestead flourished. Nakai grew into a healthy, happy toddler, calling Catherine Mama and Nathan Papa, knowing no other parents. The farm prospered under Nathan's skilled management and Catherine's tireless work. They added chickens, a milk cow, and planted an expanded vegetable garden. Their evenings were spent as a family, with Nakai playing on the floor while Catherine and Nathan talked about their day, made plans for the future, and simply enjoyed being together. On a warm spring evening, exactly 1 year after Nakai had arrived crying in his father's arms, Catherine and Nathan sat on the porch watching their son chase fireflies in the yard. Nakai's laughter rang out clear and joyful in the twilight. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked quietly. "Giving up your old life for this one?" Nathan took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing it gently. "Not for a single moment. The spirits brought me to you, Catherine. They knew what we both needed. I have found more happiness here with you and Nakai than I ever imagined possible. You are my home now, not a place or a people, but you." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their son play, and felt a peace settle over her soul. She had lost so much, suffered so deeply, but she had also found an unexpected joy. From grief had come love. From loss had come family. From the crying of an infant and the compassion of a widow had come a future full of hope and promise. "I love you, Nathan Walker," she whispered. "Thank you for wandering into my life." "I love you too, Catherine Walker," he replied, wrapping his arm around her. "And I thank you for touching my son's brow and bringing peace to both of us. You gave us life, and we give you ours in return." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the three of them went inside together, closing the door on the past and walking forward into their future as a family united not by blood, but by something far stronger: love, chosen freely and given completely. The pale widow and the grieving Comanche rider had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal, to grow, and to build a life filled with joy, purpose, and an abiding love that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead.